kid, I would just take things apart, and often would wind up taking apart the lawnmower and just needed to know how things worked. And that same inquisitive nature is really, really helpful when you're a scientist, because there's a lot of questions that are hard to answer, and you have to have a certain passion just to understand. And luckily, my work here provides me the opportunity to ask questions and try to come up with experiments that answer them. There's a lot of reasons why nutrition is important to overall health and susceptibility to disease. And for myself, I have come with a family history of cardiovascular disease and diabetes, obesity, other diseases that are common in our culture today. And understanding how diet and genetics interact is really, really important to me. And I use a popular metaphor, and that is the story about Tim Russert, who died early of cardiovascular disease, and then George Burns, who was known to be a little bit flamboyant and had a more risky lifestyle. And he smoked and drank and lived until he was 90. And understanding how genetics affects disease susceptibility is important to me. One of the most important things that happened to me was actually right before I was married. My grandfather died, and he died of cardiovascular disease. And I knew that part of that was some genetic susceptibility. He had been sick. His grandfather had, his father had cardiovascular disease, and I knew that at some point genetics were an important thing that I wanted to study. In addition, around cardiovascular disease is the ability to understand how diet and making different choices to what we eat affect disease. And so really, the Nutrition Research Institute is one of the few places in the world that focuses on high-level genetics and high-level diet and nutrition studies, and this is really the perfect place for me to work. So in the lab right now, we're working on a pathway by which different dietary nutrients affect cardiovascular risk. And the way that works is basically certain nutrients are absorbed and degraded in digestion, and part of the metabolism of that, there's a novel compound that's made that seems to affect cardiovascular risk. And we focus a good portion of our research in the lab on that particular pathway. There's a lot of areas of our research that are actually, I guess, translatable to the general population and may actually affect people's overall health. And in particular, we're interested in understanding how certain nutrients affect disease, and in particular cardiovascular disease. And if we can identify certain groups of people that should or shouldn't eat certain nutrients, and that affects their cardiovascular risk, that's really, really important. Because if I harbor some sort of genetic variant or some sort of microbial diversity that makes me personally susceptible to disease, I'd like to know that so that way I can make better informed choices. People's donations provide us with the opportunity to perform additional experiments and support students here at the Nutrition Research Institute. As a young institute, we're always looking to expand and grow our research program, and your generosity enables us to do that work. I'd really like to thank our donors. Your generosity and support has enabled us to really do some important work here at the Nutrition Research Institute. So I'd just like to take a second and say thank you very much for your generosity.